Hello, everybody. Good evening. You're very welcome to the first Let's Talk Equine of 2024. Can you believe it, Alan? We're in 2024.
Hard to believe.
Hard to believe. A happy new year to everybody out there. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I'm sure there'll be others joining us in the next couple of minutes. So Alan Creighton, Head of Nutrition and the Environment at the Irish Equine Centre. Thank you so much for giving up your time to be with us here this evening. You're very welcome.
You're very welcome too. Welcome to
I,
everybody.
I know it's been a busy day for you already. It's only Tuesday and the week has already involved two flights. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out, and we appreciate you're a busy person. But I suppose a busy person gets things done, isn't that it?
They say you want something done.
Go to a busy person, yeah. So I suppose look at the focus of this evening's discussion. We have had you as a guest on this platform before. It was actually back in, I think, December of 2020. So it's a while ago now, even though it doesn't seem that long in the interim. And on that occasion, we touched off a number of different areas relating to biosecurity and the prevention of ill health in horses. And I suppose this evening's conversation, we hope to extend that somewhat. So, you know, the viewers that are with us tonight that maybe didn't see the last conversation, they can go back into the archives. It's there on our website, and they can go back in and have a look and listen to that conversation. And I guess some of what was covered in that, you know, it's possible that we may overlap some areas that were touched on to some degree in this evening's conversation. It's difficult not to, but at the same time, we're looking at a little bit of a different angle to the conversation this evening as well too. And the focus is around underperformance in horses and ponies. And I suppose in looking at that, I guess we'll get in a couple of moments into talking about like what we understand by performance even to begin with and the different facets of that. But before we go there, for those who haven't met you or aren't familiar with the Irish Equine Centre, and I sometimes think in talking to sport horse folk that there is maybe a little bit of a misconception out there sometimes, or a little bit of misunderstanding out there in relation to the fact that the Irish Equine Centre is there not just for the thoroughbred sector, but you are there for the whole of industry.
Yeah, 100%. It is something we're working very hard on at the moment. And you can see we probably are a lot more visible on social media platforms across all the different sectors of the horse industry in Ireland. Um, yeah, I mean, as far as we're concerned, our remit is to improve and protect the health of every horse in Ireland. So it doesn't matter whether it's thoroughbred or Connemara pony or top level show jumpers or eventers, they're all equal in our eyes. So yeah, it's something we're working very, very hard on.
Mhm. And I suppose in coming within that to yourself, I guess, you know, on the one hand, you wear the hat of the scientist or the laboratory person, and on the other hand, you very much, to my mind, wear the hat of the horse person or the helmet, whichever way we want to look at it. You have yourself been very much involved in the show jumping side of things, as in that you have been a rider. You are also a breeder, a pin hooker. You have kids interested in riding and have ponies and whatnot. And you know, you're also somebody who has a deep interest in racing and all that goes with that. You're in my sort of interactions with you, you're somebody who looks to the practical side of, you know, what the solution is, as much as that you are the scientist and you can sit behind all the equipment and the diagnostics and the understanding on that level. You are on yards every other day of the week, and you know you're trying to find solutions that fit within that environment and that are implementable at that level, and that are not just the, I suppose, you know, the fancy fluffy kind of solution. They have got to work, isn't that right?
Well, yeah, and it's I suppose you've put it all very well. I suffer with the addiction. We all call it an addiction to horses, I suppose. Born and reared with them, very much on the sport horse side of it. Always thoroughbreds at home as well, but not so many. But then, just I've spent a long time in the equine centre, is what I say, and I have an awful lot of experience now across all sectors of the horse industry, and I kind of see myself. I know I've said this to you before. I was asked by a client in the UK quite recently to describe myself, and I said, well, I always say I'm a horse person first and then a scientist second. And that has probably been the biggest part of whatever perceived success I may have had or not had, because I can relate a particular situation to a client who may not be a scientist, and also make it very practical and then come up with practical solutions, because I know myself from riding show jumpers, or I know myself from when I was eventing, or I know myself from looking after breeding young stock, all the issues, and I can have first-hand experience of it myself, and then first-hand experience of all the issues I've seen over the years, and be able to have a good sense of what's going on and what we can do to improve things. And as you say, it has to be realistic. You can have all these notions about what the perfect utopia is, but it's how we achieve it, both with the availability of whatever that particular farmer or breeder has and the finances available.
Because it's the finance, and it's time, and it's labor, and it's
Yeah,
facilities, and no two farms are the same, no two circumstances are necessarily the same. So it's trying to get that sort of solution that fits for sometimes for a particular farm as well as part of what you do.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I think what I'll do is I'll pop up some slides here, and you just confirm with me that that screen share is working okay. And while I'm doing that, because I have to now, oh, I have my videos. They actually worked properly this evening, so I'm off to a good start. I have our thumbnails up as well, so I can still see you. So I suppose, look, at the reason we kind of had this slide here this evening is that we're going to talk about underperformance, but before there's underperformance, we have to understand what performance we're looking for to begin with. And I guess, it can be very easy to draw the line of equality between, what we understand as athletic performance, but there are other levels of performance as well. And there's, just the simple kind of, I suppose, healthy horse. And then if we radiate out from that to our breeding stock, you maybe are looking at having, a live foal on the ground, a healthy live foal on the ground. When we have the foal on the ground, looking to the mare that we can get her easily returned back into foal as efficiently as possible. And on the other side of the house, then when you have your growing young stock, I suppose it's keeping those healthy and keeping a smooth growth curve and all of those things. So do you want to talk to us a little bit before we get into the whole wider conversation as to kind of our starting point here?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I suppose the easiest thing to do is talk a little bit in a general sense about each of the facets you can see in front of you there. I notice we don't have a showed up a picture, but that's okay.
That's okay.
So the way I look at this is, a big body of our work is obviously working with race horses, and I've been lucky enough to work with some of the, most well-known champion trainers over the years. And all that is about is consistency of performance. My job is not to make them go faster, it's to make them be more consistent. The trainer's job is to get what he determines in terms of speed, etc., out of it. So we look at every facet from hay to feed to water to hygiene to, stock, where they keep young horses versus race horses. So everything plays into that. The same on the flat. It's a little bit different on the flat because they are not asked to gallop over the extremes of distances in general. So it's a little bit more about trying to keep them just healthy. And from a developmental sense, that they're, obviously if they're weak, they're not going to gallop and win big 2-year-old races. So it's a different type of, and we're looking at kind of contagious diseases, I suppose, and viruses, etc., or how viruses are going to spread. So it's a lot about isolation and stuff like that. When it comes to eventing, look at for me, you can see there that when you look at Olympics and badminton, etc., that there's not that much difference in terms of the respiratory performance. You know, it's all about making those lungs work well. And with that, you get the same kind of levels of hygiene that you're going to get in top level racing. And I know we spoke earlier just about just to make everyone aware that, you know, it's not just always the eventers or the top eventers or the top racehorses. Two of the clients that we called out to in the last 4 weeks were two different vets that rang me to say that they had clients who had very good ponies, but they were a little bit older and they were asthmatic types. And just this winter, they were particularly bad. And would I go and have a look, or would some of my staff go and have a look? So again, we go out. Well, I've said to you before that when it comes to asthmatic horses or ponies, and it doesn't matter if it's the happy hacker or the top show jumper, I kind of look for the same levels of hygiene and ventilation and quality of feed and hay that I would for a Gold Cup winner or a Grand National winner, because you know that lung performance is already hindered because of the level of, you know, with asthmatics, there's going to be a lot of inflammation and stuff. So you have to work very hard to clean that up. It's not simple, but you know, it is very achievable just by doing certain things. And then, you know, with the show jumpers, we do a lot of work again on the respiratory stuff, a lot of nutritional work, and then a lot of looking into making sure the biomechanics of the horse from an internal point of view work very well. So, you know, kidney, liver, etc. So we're looking at, you know, the feed intake, looking at how they use supplementation. You know, some people overdo it, some people underdo it, some people haven't a clue which way it is. So we would often investigate that for them. And then if we look down at the two slides either side, at the bottom, it's all about the stud farm stuff, and that can be such a wide range of investigations that we do. I mean, you will often get from, you know, March through till June, we'll be looking at fertility issues, for example, where we're looking at pasture management around mycotoxins or infectious diseases. We're looking at foal development, obviously. I will get called out a lot, and I have a couple of big studies ongoing at the minute with big farms in the UK where we are, you know, you might get a lot of DODs and foals on a particular farm, and you know, straight away people think they're lacking in something. So I will go in and answer all those questions with facts. We're very lucky here at the centre that over the last 7 or 8 years, we've invested heavily in analytical equipment for nutrition. And I would safely say we're probably the most well equipped equine specific nutrition laboratory in Europe now. We've got all state of the art stuff, which is great because it means we're kind of like a one-stop shop. And when we go and take samples, we can get the answers quickly. Because as we all know, the horse industry moves quite quickly and can't wait. So yeah, with these particular foal issues, where you know, it is amazing that, as I said, people always think it's, you know, a lack of minerals or whatever, but in some cases it can be the other way. It's the fact that they're overfeeding or maybe over supplementing, and so it's very varied how they get to those problems. You know, and then obviously in stud farms as well, we're looking at the whole nutritional profile. So you're looking at grass, forage, feed, supplementation. Again, looking at what minerals may be present, grass in particular, that may be actually stopping the uptake of essential minerals. Um, we also deal with a lot of respiratory issues on stud farms, so particularly rhodococcus equi. When we get to June, July, August, we end up with a lot of farms there where we're looking at how do we prevent our equi becoming an issue. You know, from March through to June, we'll be looking at contagious diseases in stud farms. So whether they manifest themselves in respiratory problems, but scours are the big one. Um, Already in December, we have been to numerous, and this week again, to numerous stud farms where we're looking at the hygiene before they start foaling, so that we have everything in order. So that you're again trying to prevent those problems. That's an extremely successful service. It is amazing, and you know, a lot of the bigger farms and the small ones where we've eradicated an awful lot of the scour issues by the the stud owners themselves being very conscious of what they're doing, but also, the good vaccination policies, good parasite policies, and then we go in and make sure that the hygiene levels and the feed quality and forage and bedding quality is very good. So that's working very well. Um, we were doing more and more grassland management. As you know, we now have three agricultural scientists in my department, and they're doing nothing else, only soil and grass management. So we have a couple of very, very big farms that we're looking after, and we've also we're doing a lot of packages for ITBA breeders, and we'll be looking at the same for sport horse breeders. And then the last thing that we do plenty of as well, I suppose, is talks on biosecurity, both to groups, whether it's the Irish National Stud or race or whatever. And also we would do it for even for individual stud farms where we'll win and talk to their staff. And that kind of leads you into the definition of biosecurity.
Yeah, it neatly has. Yeah, I mean, and we'll come back into some of what you've mentioned there as we go through the next couple of minutes. But I think it does merit maybe a little bit of explanation for people in the sense of biosecurity, because I sometimes think people hear biosecurity and they automatically think, let's get the gloves on, let's get the disinfectant out, and that's the end of it. That's all that biosecurity involves. Whereas it is a much wider conversation than just simply the disinfectant bottle. Would you like to give your perspective of what you feel is important for people to take from the message of biosecurity?
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this a lot. For me, it's a holistic approach, which is we look at absolutely everything. It's about having a criteria of stuff that are going to cause an illness in the yard, and then ticking the boxes, right? And that's it. It's no different whether it's Connemara ponies or top level flat horses. It's the same thing. They are all exposed to parasites when I pasture them, obviously. Bacteria, which again is
Sorry, the slides are hopping on me. Excuse me.
okay. And this, I don't want to get too much into that slide there.
Yeah.
When we're looking at the bacteria, it's obviously hygiene, how you isolate a sick animal, feed quality, forage quality, and water quality. They're the main things. But even to the extent when we're working in a high level thoroughbred farm, to be aware that you could be working there and you go home to your ponies and your ponies happen to have snotty noses, and you just go back to the stud farm without thinking that you're going to be handling young foals. And it's to be aware of all those issues. I mean, over the years there, during flu outbreaks, for example, I would be asked to go into a performance yard, whether it be show jumping or racing, and just look at everything they're doing to try and prevent, looking at the way that they manage those farms, which are, obviously is going to try and lead to the prevention of flu outbreaks, etc. So yeah, it's looking at all those issues, but it's very much holistic. Often we will end up with an issue with a group of horses that may have started at something completely different, right? And the reason it started at something that was quite innocuous, but was affecting their immune system, and then it left them wide open for one of the others to come in. And there's a big interaction between all of these different disease-causing organisms, and very rarely is it just one. I've often been seen on farms where they may have a bit of rotavirus at the start and they end up with a really bad Clostridial scar. So you ask yourself the question, it's a bit like chicken and egg, which one came first, or would they have got the Clostridial scar if they didn't have the rotavirus in the first place, and etc. Definitely parasites play a much bigger issue than people realize in how, in situations where they might have a viral infection, but actually, if they didn't have such a parasitic burden, they may be okay. So again, with all of these, the environment obviously plays a huge part, because first thing I always say about disease outbreaks is, the number one cause is always stocking density. and overstocking, right?
Oh,
Because you put an awful lot of animals in the same place, and that's what happens. And then obviously with performing animals, the more they're stressed, the more likely they are to get sick. So it's understanding that balance is very important.
absolutely. And I suppose, like as mentioned there, yard layouts and, the whole infrastructure of a farm and the separation within of activities within a farm and all of that, they all have interplay, the ventilation, all of these things, they all come to bear. But I suppose, and just to mention, number one, our viewers here this evening, anybody who has questions, please use the Q&A function. We'll happily receive your questions and love to have you involved in the conversation. Alan is very open to all sorts of questions. Just in relation to the parasites as well, we're emphasising they're so important. We have had previous discussion on Let's Talk Equine with one of Alan's retired colleagues now, Ursula Fogarty, and also with Nikki Walsh of UCD. The two of those, we had a conversation before. So that whole area of parasite control, if people want to refer back into that. And I know, your other colleague there, James and others, like there's been lots of conversations around that people can reference. We won't be able to get into the meat of that here this evening in the time. But just like, I suppose in relation to, like, I suppose if I even think about brood mares, for example, and we often hear like a mare that succumbs to fungal infection in her uterus, and that it's so difficult sometimes to clear those and get on top of them. Like, does that hold true in all other senses in terms of, let's say there's been fungal infection in feed or forage or whatever, and that reverberates through into the system, or is in the environment in general? Like, is there a difference in the risk level for horses relating to whether it's viral or fungal or bacteria, or how that interplay is, or how easy they are to clear?
Well, I mean, one of the most difficult things is when, fungal infections infiltrate, whether it's respiratory or reproductive. They're very, very difficult to get rid of. But fungi are extremely opportunistic. So it's about exposure, but then it's about their opportunity to actually invade. So a good example would be if somebody was treating a horse for a bacterial infection with antibiotics, but they had a stable that was contaminated heavily with different types of fungi. Well, those fungi may not have caused a problem up until the time where they started antibiotics. And we always find, or in a lot of cases, we'll find that fungi will take their opportunity when the defenses are down, and those antibiotics may have cleared the way by killing off good bacteria in the nasal passage that would normally prevent the infiltration of the fungi. So it's that type of link to understand that, I always advise whether if a yard, no matter what type, is going through a particular sickness at any time, whether it be viral or bacterial related, that they go with washing out the stable anyway, because you have it's much more likely that that horse will recover quicker when it only has the issue at hand to deal with. If there's other issues within that stable, i.e., pathogenic fungi, it's going to take an awful lot longer for it to get rid of. And also, you have a bigger chance of that fungi becoming a problem as well. So first thing I always get them to do is empty the box, wash it out, disinfect it, and then start from afresh.
Yeah, yeah. And just when I see stress here as well too, I suppose maybe just like explain, I guess, stress for me, stress with horses, and having good routines and having kind of, I suppose, a good environment in the sense of the peace of the horse in its environment is so important to their overall health as well too. But I guess for different horses, we're like, like people, we react differently to different things. For one horse, stress may mean the yard is too quiet. For another horse, it may mean the yard is too busy. There's travel, there's, you know, all of those, the different types of scenarios that arise, weaning with foals, mares, you know, getting segregated from their buddies when they have to go to stud, or, you know, all these different instances, they're all different forms of stress. How much of an impact does stress, or can stress have in in these scenarios relating to succumbing to infection?
I think it has to be up there as certainly, it's in the top three, if not the number one reason, because stress it can take so many different forms, as you've already said. But there is no doubt that with performance animals, um, if they're weak and not that mature, they're obviously under a lot more pressure. And when we're asking them to do something, and they're very weak, they're obviously not going to be able for it. And then, we keep going to the well, and then they end up getting sick, right? And someone will say, oh, well, sure, look, I got a viral infection, or, they got a bad bacterial infection. But as I've often said before, you could probably get a healthy, well-fed horse, throw it in a dirty stable and throw every type of virus and bacteria at it, and just don't ride it out or don't gallop it, and they may not get sick. That's the reality of it. So, um, yeah, understanding stress, whether it's to do with the temperament, whether it's to do with the level of work they're doing, whether it's to do with a busy yard, whether it's due to the stress of traveling, all of that plays into it. The stress of being away at a big show for the first time is very similar to the first time that, 3-year-old or 4-year-old national hunt horses go galloping. I often, when yearlings are being broken, flat yards, that's a really, it's a big time for them to get sick. So yeah, it's a huge part of, particularly the high performance stuff. It's a massive part of being successful in understanding how to deal with it. And obviously the stress of the trainer or the jockey or the stud owner is also a big part of it. So yeah, I think it's very, very important.
Yeah. And just, I suppose, you know, maybe before we go on in the slides, like if we talk about a performance yard versus a breeding yard, um, you know, how issues present themselves, I guess, you know, in a performance scenario, you have the benefit maybe of talking to the groom, of talking to a rider, and hearing their perspective as well too on, you know, on what's happening. And there's often, you know, like that absolute daily interaction, and the daily checks are absolutely bedded in there in majority of scenarios, and you get a pretty full picture. But how, you know, like I suppose on the one hand, the question I have in my head is, are the issues the same now that they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Are we seeing new issues arising? Are the issues the same? And typically, like, what are, you know, you've mentioned some things already this evening, but what are the most prominent issues that come to bear, that come to your door, in the sense of these athletic performance horses that you get the call, Alan, I'm dealing with, will you come? And, like, you know, what are the problems that arise there? So that's kind of like a two-pronged question.
Well, I suppose the easiest way really is to talk about, stuff that we've done in the recent past, because it's obviously fresh in my mind. But only today, or sorry, yesterday and this morning, I was in a couple of different sport horse yard in the UK and two different national hunt yards in the UK, and they all had three different issues, but they all related to the same thing. Okay, in my mind, they related to the same thing. One was a very old, poorly ventilated, not very hygienic yard that obviously suffers a lot of dampness, and we've had an extremely damp winter, both here as autumn and winter, both here and in the UK, where it's been very mild. So, you walk in and into the stable, and within a minute you're feeling nauseous yourself, in terms of, I'm an asthmatic, so I nearly start to wheeze straight away. So these particular horses were manifesting themselves, and they stopping about a mile out in their races, vet, takes lung washes and bloods, rules out viral or bacterial infection, but they have high neutrophils in their lung washes, which is typical of a poor environment. Where another yard that I went into today, the jockeys were saying that these horses are just never traveling, right? So they feel weak, they don't feel like they've any energy. There's no bucking or squealing going on. Um, and when I went in and had a look, that's always screams viral infection to me. But we may have missed when it was active. So the horses are still, they could go and take samples and they say that there's no actually active viral infection, but it doesn't mean it wasn't there 3 weeks ago. But in that case, you go in and I found this yard was feeding haylage, where they were storing the haylage was particularly bad, even though their stable ventilation was very good, the hygiene in the stable was very good. But where they were storing their haylage was just black mold everywhere. So, and this yard was taking 3 to 4 days to use the bale of haylage. So that was picking up that mold, bringing it into the yard. And they were obviously breathing that in every day, and that's the exact place there now, and you can see all that black mold growing on the walls. So even though it looked, they perceived it was hygienic. If you look at that, particularly where that haylage is, like because that wall is black, it actually hides what's growing there. But when I swab it, you get this black mold on the swab straight away, and I know straight away that that's a particular type of mold that's going to cause respiratory issues. But not only does it cause respiratory issues, as I said before, it will also reduce their immune system, and that gave the viral infection its chance to cause the problems that it did. So that was a great example of one leading to another. So how do we solve it? The yard was already very ventilated. They just go in and wash it out, disinfect it, and they move their haylage to a spot that they can clean and clean up and disinfect on a regular basis. And those horses will come right because this particular trainer understands stress very well. He'll back off them properly. He'll give them enough time, and they've a well ventilated yard already, so he has no work to do in that regard. So 2 3 weeks they'll be back flying again.
So I suppose as much as you go in there maybe sometimes on the behest of what has arisen with veterinary intervention already,
Yeah.
you still can come with your little bag of tricks of, swabs and whatnot, and you have, your samples sent back to the laboratory, and you can get deeper into the root of what's going on from that perspective.
Yeah, so we'll go in and take, swabs, air samples, haylage samples, both say from a fresh bale and a bale that's been exposed in that haylage shed for 3 or 4 days, feed samples, etc., water samples. And then we go back and, you have a fairly good idea today you're there. Well, I would because I've spent so much time looking at so many scenarios. And then the samples just reaffirm and identify exactly where it might come from so that we can, one, get answers, but two, we can then highlight what areas we need to tackle first, and then get around to all the different facets that might affect it.
Mhm. And I suppose, you have at your disposal the means to test not just the hay or the haylage, but you can also look at bedding and, all of those scenarios you can take a deeper dive into to see what's actually happening in there. And, like how typical is it for issues to arise from those sources?
Oh, it's very typical, and you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. Like at the Equine Centre, any one of the departments may start the investigation in terms of, there could be lung washes go into the pathology department, and next minute I get a phone call to say that there's high neutrophils in a load of lung washes, go and have a look. You could have water quality issues coming from the microbiology unit or scour issues that have been identified in the microbiology unit, and they ring us and they say, will you go and have a look? So all of those scenarios happen every year at different times of the year. And there is a bit of a pattern to it. And then I suppose a big part of my job is, well, how do we break that cycle? What can we do to help the stud owner, the pony owner, the national hunt trainer, the flat trainer, the show jumper, the eventer, what can we help them understanding how all of those different sports or different types of horses, the stress involved, everything that goes with it, how can we help them prevent issues? And it's all very different. I mean, obviously, with a show jumper, they tend to be older horses. They're not under as much respiratory stress as a 2-year-old flat horse would be. Um, the thoroughbred still farms are dealing with a couple of hundred mares, whereas a sport horse yard down the road might only have 5 or 6 mares. So
They also may have other performance horses there and animals that are moving back and forth from the farm as well too. So there's
yeah,
different connotations at play. Yeah.
and like another, even today, one of those national hunt yards, like to my dismay, between two horses that were sick, here was two snotty nosed foals that your man felt sorry for and pulled in out of the field during the bad weather. But again, that's asking for trouble when you've got performance animals.
Mhm.
So that kind of, this is the first time I met this particular trainer, and it was I won't say a harsh conversation afterwards, but there was a lot of pointing out of, as you know, I'm quite black and white, that there's no point wasting time. I'll tell you exactly what I think and what is going to help these animals and what's going to help that particular trainer. And there's no point fluffing around it. We just get straight to the point. I mean, that's, as I've said before, from a viral and bacterial point of view, bringing in foals into a yard where show jumpers may be going to a high level show or race horses are going to have a race. It's, as I've said, I think
Trouble.
biosecurity suicide, I describe it as sometimes.
Asking for trouble.
Yeah.
I'm just referring here to a couple of questions that have come in. One person is asking, is it an issue to keep open haylage bales close to a stable door?
Not particularly. I have no problem with that. Depending on obviously whether that stable door is outside or not. Um, whether it's if it's in a barn, I don't particularly like people storing open haylage in a barn where the stables are, because there's a number of issues. If you open up a bale and it happens to be a bad bale, well, those spores obviously go everywhere within the stables themselves before you've even brought it into a stable. It's already causing trouble. And in a barn, people often, when I always find it interesting, they might wash and disinfect, but they never look up.
Mm,
Right? And
mm,
when you look up, you will obviously see mold growth underneath the roof spaces and everywhere. And that's often, I don't think we need to be bringing big bales of haylage in there into a place that is going to end up, if it gets contaminated, it's going to be a big issue to wash down the whole place. Whereas if you open it up in a small area that's easy to sweep up and keep clean and easy to disinfect if something goes wrong, or even as a maintenance, it's much better practice
mm,
because you've just made your job a lot easier.
mhm. Absolutely. And I know we spoke about it in the last webinar, but again, it's the management when with all your feed in terms of having it in areas that are clean and easy to manage, but also not kind of crossing over in either equipment or in the activity of feeding, mucking out, etc., with similar implements and contain, whether it be wheelbarrows and all of that as well too. So
Yeah, I mean, look at again. I try to get it to make people realize that if something goes wrong, you need to be able to rectify it easily and quickly, right? So I'm going to give you 3 quick examples. If you have a feed house that doubles up as your office, your trophy cabinet, your tack room, right? And next minute I go in and say, listen, you've got mold growth on this wall that's going to affect every feed that's left exposed, right? Well, now you have to go and empty absolutely everything out of there to clean and disinfect your feed house, right? So that's going to take a long time. Instead of taking 20 minutes, it could take you 3, 4 hours. The same in the stocks. I could walk into a stocks on a stud farm and isolate or identify, say, Clostridia or a salmonella, right? And I say, now you need to empty this, wash it out, disinfect it, disinfect it again, wash it again, and disinfect it again to make sure you have it right. But next minute we look up and there's reams of books and medicational records and different bits of medication and all sorts of stuff everywhere that it's going to take us a long time to clean up before we can actually get to the washing. So it's those type of scenarios, again, the same with your haylage and your hay. If it's in a big machinery shed with tractors and all gates and all fences and doors and everything, right? Well, obviously, how do you clean that? You can't. So, in an ideal world, if we're designing something from scratch, you have every place, everything that's good, everything that can affect every horse. So, i.e., a feed house, a hay store, a stocks in a stud farm scenario. You try and have it. You imagine to yourself, right? If somebody come in and says there's an infectious agent or disease causing organism in one particular spot, how long would it take me to empty it and clean it and wash it and disinfect it? And if you keep that in the back of your head, life becomes much easier. It becomes much more controllable. You can control the risk a lot easier.
For sure. For sure. I'm just looking at another question here. Somebody switched to rape chop straw with shavings topper. Both are dust extracted. No issues so far. Are there any opinions on this new rape chop straw for horses with poorer wind or I suppose likelihood to have asthmatic conditions?
Well, look at, oilseed rape has been pretty high profile over the last year or two, obviously, with respiratory issues in horses, but that's in the plant itself when it's in the field. When we're talking about bedding, any straw or any harvested bedding is capable of having problems. So it's the same process. It's about moisture control. It's about how it's stored after it's made. It's about how it's bagged. It's about the machinery that's bagging it. All of that plays into it. So for me, the fact that it's rape straw doesn't automatically mean that you're going to get the same effect or negative effect that you would get with rape in a field, right? So so far so good. I have to say it's not that long. It's probably only about 3 years that people have been using it. I couldn't say that it causes any more problems than normal straw would. It's the old adage that I keep telling people: the best bedding in the world is good straw. It doesn't matter what type of straw it is, once it's good. The worst bedding in the world is bad straw. And again, the same applies no matter what type of straw it is. If it's bad, it's bad.
Mhm. And have you seen, like, I mean, I imagine that you have cause to test different types of bedding there at the Equine Centre, dependent on different yard scenarios. Have you found any tendency for issues to arise more or less? Like obviously you're a proponent of straw, and I know you're a proponent of hay as well too. Like, have you found with any of the other beddings that they're more likely to propagate disease or hold on to or be an issue?
No, well, it's obviously about the moisture
Right.
level in that particular product, right? So whether it's shavings or um, the different type of straws or rapeseed or whatever, it all depends on the moisture level and what level of fungi was there before it was even harvested. With shavings, again, if they're not dried properly, there's a balance. So if they're not dried properly, there's more likelihood of mold growth. If they're dried too much, you end up with small particles and you end up with a lot of dust. So I always say to people, if you are dealing with an asthmatic horse, for example, and you put down your straw or your shavings bed and the wall was clean and now there's a layer of dust everywhere, well, those shavings aren't good enough for an asthmatic horse because every time they move, there's going to be dust in the air, so it's not going to work. So straw, I think, is very interesting. It's obviously been incredibly difficult year this year. Between one thing and another, there's an extreme shortage. Obviously, the weather played a huge part. Some government policy has also played a part in what's available. So it's actually at the stage now, which is annoying, where we're bringing in an awful lot of straw from Spain and from even from the UK because there's such a shortage here. But again, it is better than using straw that we know is going to cause an issue.
A couple of different questions here. There's one relating to growth. I'm just going to leave that there for the moment. I am acknowledging it to the attendee, but we want to come back to the breeding and young stock in a moment. There's another here. Has the blue-green algae caused any issues in water sources? I noticed my horses wanted out to rain water sources. I noticed my horses. I'm not sure what the end of it, but had the blue-green algae caused any issues in the water source?
Definitely, yeah, has caused issues over the years, and any water that's not flowing, yeah, is capable of producing blue-green algae over time. So we're all guilty of never checking our water troughs and fields, and you can go out and sometimes you can't. It's like a forest underneath the water. So it is something that we're very conscious of, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's the best disinfectant for mold, such as what was in the shown in the slides a moment ago? Do you recommend lime thrown on floors and wall? What do you think of the old cure of hanging holly in the roof to keep fungus at bay? Maybe I shouldn't have asked you that one, Alan.
Well, you're going very well until the
I
last.
was going very well up until that, yeah.
Yeah. Look, I certainly see myself as one of the biggest proponents of not dismissing the old ways, because I believe so many of them were so important. And as medication control comes more and more stringent, we have to nearly look to a lot of the old ways. And I know I've said this to you before. I find it remarkable. I get to work in places like Shanty and Newmarket and the Curragh, where they've yards that were built 150 years ago, and the ventilation is exactly the same way as I would build into a new yard now. But the only problem was some genius decided to board it all up over the years. Now I've spent so many hours on planes trying to figure out why that was, whether it was fashion, whether it was builders, whatever it was. But I would imagine that when antibiotics became available, we had the answer to a lot of bacterial infections, whereas before that, people used old ways around ventilation and hygiene to prevent disease. So, well, that's my view, and that's what I keep telling people, whether it's right or not. But it is remarkable looking at ventilation in particular, how right they got it 150 years ago, and then we just, for some reason, forgot it. The
Not,
whole,
not only forgot it, but then created all these big American barns and put all nature forces together under the one roof, breathing the same air, and often, yeah, not adequate air.
yeah, and there's trainers who have come to me in over the years and said, look, I'm going to buy a new yard. There's one particular place where there's 60 boxes in one barn and 40 in the other. What do you think?
Mm.
And you go and have a look at it and you go, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. But when you get there, there's great light and extremely good ventilation. So you can make that work. Okay. But it's not what I would do from the start. But that particular yard is actually one of the best trainers in the UK. He's made it work very well because he gets everything else right.
Absolutely.
The disinfection question, we do an awful lot of disinfection trials for a lot of different companies. So I don't particularly want to talk about which ones are better. But what I will say is definitely use the ones that are equine specific,
Mhm.
okay, where they've been tested against equine specific pathogens, including that mold that you see there, which was Aspergillus niger. And then there is some disinfectants out there that they create a residual barrier that gives you a bit of extra protection. They're definitely worth using because it means you can, particularly with stocks and walkers and places, high risk areas, you can spray it on and it's going to work for maybe a week or 10 days before you go and do it again.
Mhm.
So they're very useful.
And your take on, because I do know a lot of people still revert to using lime. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a misconception. Lime is very, very good on walls, right? But actually, it's not good on the floor because it aggravates ammonia. So it actually increases the intensity of ammonia from urine. So not on the floors, definitely on walls. Okay.
There's a couple of other questions in here. One relating to using bales of haylage. Is it correct to say that bales should be used within a predetermined number of days, and therefore not the large bales then not so suitable for a smaller number of horses over a longer period, or ponies? Can it also be bad to leave larger bales of hay in the field for outdoor supplemental feeding in poor weather conditions and winter? So two angles to that.
A minefield, a total minefield, and totally determined. Depends on the situation, right? So we have a rule that is should be a large bale has to be used inside of 4 days in the winter, or sorry, yeah, 4 days in the winter, 3 days in the summer. Obviously, because the temperature is so much higher in the summer, it's going to mold much quicker because heat that those type of ambient temperatures will always encourage it. But if you put that same bale of haylage into an area that I showed you earlier, beside a load of mold, where there's available mold spores ready to attack it straight away, well, then that bale could go off in 24 hours. It could go off in 36 hours. Okay. So for that reason, I'm not a fan of haylage, not just because of what people, the usual nutritionists speak about it being a lot of water and the variance in the nutrition itself. It's more down to the practical management of it that it's a very, this year it's a godsend that we have haylage because there's just no availability of good hay really at this stage. But you still have to manage that situation well, and how you feed it, how you store it, even down to I kind of see in some larger yards where, excuse me, they're feeding haylage from the same wheelbarrow the whole time. And there's this lovely, fresh looking haylage on the top of the wheelbarrow. And then I just dig down a foot, and there's haylage that's been in that wheelbarrow for weeks on end, and it's just black with mold. And, so all of those scenarios play into a different, and you can end up with a different time frame. So again, it's about opening it in a clean place, feeding it with a clean vessel, and then where you put it in the stable, make sure you're conscious of it, that you don't end up look in that corner where you put the haylage the whole time. As soon as you see any black starting to grow, it's time to disinfect it. Now, the one in the field, again, it obviously depends on the amount of horses, right? But it's interesting, a scenario I had a couple of years ago where a guy, a very, very successful producer of horses, but he would have foals, yearlings, 2-year-old, 3-year-olds all the way through. And when they brought in a group of national hunt 3-year-olds and scoped them, a lot of them were wrong to wind. And it happened 2 years in a row where you're talking 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, just insane numbers that it's not normal. And of course, we started looking at all sorts of issues. What are we doing wrong? And we went up, and they were feeding haylage out of the same feed trough in a field, or a hay trough in a field, but never moved it, right? So all that haylage ends up in the bottom, and it was just like 6 inches of jelly that had developed over time, and that was actually full of a type of Clostridia that is known to cause paralysis. So again, a simple thing that ended up in an absolute disaster because these were very expensive horses at the time.
Yeah, and like that's back to whether that is your vehicles to move feed or forage or bedding around the place, or whether it is the bins that hold your feed, or whether it is the feed bowls that you're feeding from, etc., whether it's your water troughs. All of these areas, they all have the capacity to impart, to grow and to impart disease to your stock. So it is small, bit of like sometimes it's about a little bit of effort on the small things can have huge dividends in the longer term, shall we say.
Well, I mean, look, Wendy, I always say this, that I am 100% convinced that the very top people in every sport to do with horses, or every type of stud farming to do with horses, are the ones that understand that if they do all the little things right, they will be successful. and it is kind of mundane, but once they get into that pattern of doing it that way, it becomes, part of their everyday experience, and they're organized, and they end up actually, as a very good stud owner said to me one day that they used to have historical scar problems every year, where 60-70% of their foals ended up with scars, and he said it's much nicer not having to spend all our time wiping a foal's
Backside.
backside, right? Because no one enjoys it.
Mm.
So that little bit of extra work they do to prevent it makes it so worthwhile not having to be watching backside.
Mhm. And before we can leave the nutrition side of things, and I do see another question there in relation to water, and I come to it in a moment, but um, I suppose just thinking around, like I guess, with feed prices having gone up over the last while, and like you kind of see the interaction on social media, and even listening to people talking, there are a cohort who reverted back to using straights as opposed to using the bag feed. What's the propensity for issues to arise there, or how important is it, I suppose, to have those cereals checked, assessed for hygiene, quality, and just talk to us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, interestingly, again, I'm going to show my age here. When I started doing what I'm doing, I would say nearly all of the bigger stud farms and racehorse trainers fed oats. Okay.
Mm.
And the normal scenario, if it was a national hunt trainer, they'd buy in a big batch of oats in October, stored in the loft, crushed in a crusher on the way down, and then fed out of a bin, right?
Yeah, we did the same 20 years ago, and
Everybody did,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I cannot think. I work with probably 200 trainers in Ireland, England, France at this stage, and I cannot think of one person who still does that, right? So that happened for a reason. Obviously, compound feeds became very important, but also at the time, people started to realize that, well, if I ended up with a bad batch of oats, I'm stuck with it for the whole year, causing respiratory problems. And that is actually, and it would often get labeled as a virus, right? Now, actually, what probably happened was it was coinciding with a virus, because the two things going on around one time, and one initiated
Mhm.
the problems of the other. So from there, everybody, looked to get away from that, or they certainly cleaned up their act in terms of the crusher they used, how they stored it, etc. Getting it tested is very, very simple. It's about literally, if you had 30 or 40 bags of oats there, you're taking a very small handful from 10 different bags, putting it into a bag, sending it into the equine centre. 40 euros later, you tell you exactly per the colony forming unit per grams of all the different types of molds that are present in that. And there is always going to be some mold. Oats, there's never such thing as a sterile oat unless you boil it. But there's so many of those molds that don't cause any problems whatsoever. They're just normal flora. But it's the pathogenic ones, the ones that cause either enteric problems or cause respiratory issues, are the ones that we have to be aware of. A lot of people, I suppose, haven't had to think about oats for a lot of years, because it all came from a feed company and they were doing a lot of the testing. But you're right, there is a lot of people going back to straights. So they need to remember that there's no point coming to me 5 months down the line and saying, oh, I should have tested that before I started using it. Because, it's like you've already done the damage, where it's the simplest thing in the world. The same with hay, same with straw is not as easy to do because you use so much of it. But certainly, we do test an awful lot of straw, obviously. But in terms of hay or haylage, it's so important to, particularly in the sport horse industry, I always find that if it's making up 60-70% of your diet, well, you should know what's in it, because we're only guessing otherwise. So again, it's just the same thing. If you have 50 bales of hay there, take a fistful from the center of 6, 7 different bales, different parts of the stack, put it in a bag, send it in. But just always remember, it's interesting. Again, I'm showing my age. I'm looking at it so long now. Like, someone could send me in a sample of oats, haylage, hay, and straw, right? And they all come back with the same mold, and I have to bring them up and say, well, actually, what happened there was your hay, for example, was contaminated. you didn't clean your hands or wear gloves, and you just went and sampled everything else straight after that, and you literally just passed the mold from one sample to another. Now you may go back and start again. So it's so important that if you're checking feed or hay or haylage or straw, that you think about, okay, if I'm taking multiple samples, wash your hands, clean your hands, or wear gloves in
Gloves
between.
and change.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you something else there. It's gone out of my mind. I'll go the route of you mentioned when we started the conversation that you were talking in relation to over supplementation. And I suppose, a lot of the time we talk about the hygienic side of the house. And what the question actually that I was going to ask you, that's come back into my mind, was in relation to how potentially how issues in relation to unhygienic, like it's easier for us to kind of imagine we've unhygienic hay or bedding, and that manifests itself in respiratory issues. The issues around unhygienic, we say cereals, how are they likely to manifest in the sense of the issues with the horse?
Well, normally in exactly the same way, we talk about the breathing zone of an animal, right? So it's that couple of feet around their nostrils. So if they're sticking their nose into a feed pot that has contaminated feed in it, they're just breathing in the spores in exactly the same way. And then obviously those particular spores get left in the feed pot. Feed pot doesn't get cleaned out from one week to the next. It's growing away there happily. You look in the corners and you see this lovely white or black mold growing away. So every time that horse sticks its head in the feed pot, regardless of what's in the feed, they're breathing in mold spores. And then obviously those spores cause inflammation, and you either have an asthmatic horse or a horse that's breathing becomes difficult, or they could manifest in a bleed eventually, depending on how much strenuous exercise they're doing. So yeah, it used to be just as prevalent in the Straits, to be honest, as it was in hay back in the day. It's just because feed companies got so good at what they do and everyone used so many compound feeds that we never really had to think. We didn't have, it was always something that we thought about, but as feed started to become heat treated and extruded, that there wasn't so many issues with them.
Mhm. And then coming to the nutritive side of things in the sense of, the issues that you mentioned earlier on in relation to those who maybe don't um haven't maybe taken the time to do the analysis on the forage to ascertain what its nutritive value is, and then coming to the concentrate side, they use the bagged feed, they maybe decide, well, I'm actually going to top up with this supplement and maybe another bit of that supplement just in case that. And sometimes it can the conversation gets a little bit muddled in that sense. Like, what are the kind of issues that you at your end have seen arising related to those kind of scenarios?
Well, it depends on the age of the horse. When we're looking at foals, for example, right? We get over supplementation, of calcium, phosphorus, whatever, right? And all of that excess has to go somewhere, right? And if those foals are heavy, say for example, as well, and being overfed, you end up having lumps and bumps everywhere because actually there was nowhere they couldn't excrete it quick enough, right? That's the first thing. In older horses, it's interesting. A particular yard I was dealing with quite recently, and again, this is not, supplementation is extremely important, right? I'm a big believer in establishing the facts first. So most compound feeds in particular are very, very well fortified with all of the essential minerals, and in a lot of cases have enough. But then you may have a scenario where you've got a very poor quality forage or very poor quality pasture, which may have high levels, in pasture in particular, where it might have high levels of what we will call antagonistic minerals that are preventing the uptake of copper, for example. So in that case, supplementation, you may have no choice, right? But you have to establish the facts first. So we know it's in the feed bag. So you now need to know what's in your grass or what's in your forage, depending on the time of year. Then you can make an informed decision, right? On the performance side, I think, people who are into athletic performance in horses, no matter which sphere it is, are perfectionists. And sometimes they overdo everything where I would go in and do a bit of a study where I look at everything they're feeding, and they may have duplication of the necessary levels of minerals of a particular mineral, or triplication or quadruplication in some cases. That's not doing that horse any good, because that excess has to go somewhere, and then the kidney and the liver come under pressure. And as soon as those organs start to come under pressure, obviously performance in terms of dealing with lactic acid, etc., that comes under pressure. So over supplementation is a problem. But also, interestingly, a lot of those supplements, when we have a thing there called, it's a particle counter, right? So we can actually tell you the exact size of that powder, the size of the actual particle itself, and whether that is capable of making its way into the lung or not, right? And you would say, well, why is that relevant? Well, if you get somebody that's in a rush and say they give a horse a scoop of nuts and a scoop of horse mix, and they have 5 different supplements that are all powders, and they throw them on top of the feed, well, the horse is going to come in and start nuzzling to try and get to the mix, probably because of the molasses. Everything becomes airborne, and any of the particles that are small enough to infiltrate the lung will make their way into the lung, and you end up with inflammation, right? And the ironic thing about that is some of those powders may be powders that are supposed to be helping with respiratory issues. But so you'd say, well, what is the answer? Stop using them? No. The answer is to make sure that they're mixed very well first, so you're happy that nothing is going to get airborne. So it's those type of issues. It can be, related to internal issues, or it can simply be respiratory issues as well. So you have to keep your eyes open all of the time. And again, it's down to practical management, isn't it?
Absolutely, in all cases, isn't it? Yeah, and just keeping your eye across everything as well. There is actually a question, and I'll put it in here at the moment, and I know I'm jumping through the questions. So for those that I haven't come to yet, I promise I'll come back to you. How important is soil testing? And would it be sufficient to test a selection of paddocks within a farm? In this instance, they're talking about a 30-acre farm, to look at the mineral profile, and I suppose the fertilizer that is used in conjunction with that. And I suppose, look at, like, I'd have my own take on this as well too. You are my guest this evening, so I'll pass it to you.
But look, at you may have we very similar takes on this. Actually, it's just that obviously Teagasc are dealing with all sorts of species, where we're dealing with horses. So we kind of encourage people to soil sample every 2 years for 30 acres. You have to, within reason, if that 30 acres all looks like the same and it's just been split by stud rail fencing, absolutely, you can take 1 or 2 samples and it's going to give you a fair idea what's going on there. But, we have a service there where we send somebody out. It doesn't cost anything extra, to be honest. And we have proper soil samplers and people who know how to do it properly. So it's very representative.
That is the key, really, with soil samples. Whether it's done properly, the samples are done to the right depth, that you're not, trying to go to areas of the field that are misrepresentative as well too. All of those things are all very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's true experience. If you have a field that's on a hill, right, and then it gets to a nice flat bottom at a river, and you decide to walk down to that flat bottom to take your soil sample, it's going to be totally different there compared to when it's up at the top of the field. So you have to be representative, as we've already said. But I suppose, when we're looking at soil, P and K is obviously very important, extremely important, because it's going to dictate how much fertilizer we use. We're also looking at organic matter levels, and we're looking at pH. They're the 4 parameters that I'm interested in. When I'm talking about the minerals levels, I'm looking at the grass, right? And at the grass at the time when we're grazing. You could have loads and loads of availability of copper, say, for example, but you also have molybdenum in the soil, and that's preventing it. You could have loads of availability of zinc and magnesium and other important minerals, but you also have extremely high levels of aluminium and iron and lead, because the pH is too low. and the grass is incapable of taking up the good minerals. So soil really pH, organic matter, and P and
And
K.
when we're talking pH, we're talking about whether there is the requirement or otherwise to apply lime. And, so often people can waste money buying other bag fertilizers without addressing the pH first, and then effectively really wasting their
Yeah,
hard-earned cash as well too. And I suppose just the other bit that I put into the whole equation as well, and this too, is that whole farm nutrient planning is important from the perspective of looking at what's going through in bag feed as well, and what's coming out of the animal in pee onto the farm too. So, that whole thing is something that, people can work with yourselves or work with an agricultural advisor, consultant on to try
absolutely.
and get that right for their whole farm.
And no different to the nutrition side of things, where rather than, if you know that you need supplementation, fine, go and get your supplements. But if you analyze your forage and your feed and realize that actually I've plenty of,
Okay. Yeah.
right, you're saving yourself money. It's exactly the same with soil management and grass management. When all the fertilizer prices went through the roof there a couple of years ago, obviously I was very upset because of the cost for buying fertilizer for my own place. But when it came to actually talking and convincing people that it's actually very efficient farming to do soil sampling and grass sampling, because then you're not wasting fertilizer, you're not wasting supplementation, you know what's available to your animals. And you're actually saving money in the long run, and they're being produced properly. So it's intelligent farming, I call it, rather than efficient farming.
And as well as that, it's understanding what the demands are from your grazing as well too, and not over driving where you don't need over supply
Yeah.
of grass. Fine if you're looking for forage conservation and so forth. Fine if you're cross grazing with other stock that have the demands, but if your stocking densities are low and you don't need to be up in those high indexes for your P's and K's. It's important to give the full information to an advisor when you're talking to them in relation to the demands. I'm conscious, just to spend maybe 5-10 minutes just in relation to the side of the house of the breeding, the fertility, the young stock, that side of things. So I suppose if we maybe firstly maybe talk a little bit around the fertility side of things. And I know you mentioned at the very outset that you have packages there that you can look at, what's going on with mares before you get into the season, and maybe just give us a little bit of a sense of that, and then we'll move to the young stock, because I am looking at the time as well too now.
Well, just very quickly, so we are doing packages for Horse Island and for the ITBA, where we have identified key areas that we can have an influence on within the stud farm that's going to improve both the health of newborn foals, but also help with fertility issues. And they are pretty much around your forage quality, looking at mold, but also toxins that we know affect fertility. Looking at hygiene in stocks, which on a stud farm is, if you have a stock, it's the most important place. If we look at infiltration of disease to reproductive organs, we're often looking at hygiene in itself. Water quality, again, extremely important when we're talking about disease control. And then we're also looking at, nursery paddocks and paddocks where mares are before they actually come into foal. So interestingly, when we get extremely wet conditions like this, I get very nervous because I know we're going to run into a lot of scar problems. Because if you imagine a scenario where you may have 6 or 7 mares, you're watching them and you're letting them out every day to a 2 acre field, and it ends up with a big mud bath, and there's a lot of lying water everywhere. Well, I know once that soil is dug up that we're going to have an awful lot of bacteria that we don't want too much exposure to. They're always going to be there, but I just don't want too much exposure. So you imagine the mares coming back in with mud all over them, back into the clean bed, lie down, those bacteria start get going. Next minute the foal arrives, and every day the foal comes back in and is nuzzling up the mare's leg before it realizes where the udder is, and it's picking up all these lovely bacteria that are going to cause a scar problem and end up in a scar problem. So there's the problem. What's the solutions? Well, the solutions are be aware of, the muddy paddock, right? But what I try and get farms to do, if they have the manpower to do it, is to actually wash down those mares' legs once that foal is born, when they're coming back in from the field. Wash down their underbelly, even get a little basin of Milton, very dilute level of Milton, and around the udder, so that that foal is still going to be exposed to the bacteria that may cause a scar problem, but it's not going to be exposed to the masses of it, that it has no choice. If there's any weakness in that foal, it's going to end up with a scar problem. So there are things that we've implemented in a lot of farms and it's worked extremely well. So it's to be conscious of that. And then obviously when the foal is born, if we're using nursery paddocks, that again, be conscious. If you have the capability of creating numerous nursery paddocks that you can rotate and don't let the soil get exposed in, that's the perfect scenario. But and if you're using all weather paddocks, just remember that disease will live from one year to another in an all weather surface. So if it's it's not easy for everyone to change a surface because it costs a lot of money, but look at the high wear areas, like around water troughs, around feed troughs, at the gate.
Yeah.
Those high wear areas are the most likely places for those diseases to be lurking. So that's also very important.
Yeah. And I suppose as well too, in the sense of the other high traffic areas where there tends to be a lot of overplay of stock are your handling stocks, your transport vehicles, um, all of those zones, the foaling
Mhm.
boxes,
Yeah.
they're the kind of key areas to have a real consciousness around the hygiene, would you say?
Now, look, and the way I say it to stud farms there, and through the work that we've done with them and a lot of hard work with them over the last 5, 6 years, in every case where they pay particular attention to stocks, foaling units, you get a massive reduction in scour problems. Okay, so when I say particular attention to foaling units, if you have two foaling boxes, once that foal is born, box gets emptied, power washed out, disinfected, rebedded for the next mare.
Mhm.
No sharing. Yes, there's lots of farms who will foal in the same box with the same bedding, and best of luck to them. And sometimes they get away with it, sometimes they don't. But invariably, you end up with problems, and there is no doubt that the people who spend a lot of time making sure that those boxes are cleaned out completely and disinfected have an awful lot less problems.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, and just there was a question here earlier, somebody wondering about your thoughts on disinfecting stables using fogging machines.
Again, it's fogging is a huge part of maintenance now, but it's only as good as the person who's using it. And that's the reality.
And it being clean to begin with, not.
Absolutely. There's no point window dressing and fooling yourself, right? So a typical scenario would be a box that's washed out a couple of months ago. Um, I want you to disinfect it with a fogger. I normally get them to go in, take down the banks, sweep the width of a yard, brush around where the wall meets the floor because you want to see what's growing in behind in those damp spots. Brush down any cobwebs or any organic matter that's on the wall, and then go around with your fogger and get a coating of a disinfectant on every surface. Obviously, covering up your water trough and your feed trough. What I don't like to see is somebody walking in, and I've seen this, so I've seen every scenario, right, where someone is leave the fogger in one box in a barn, and the horses either side have to stand there and breathe it in, right? Which, if you can't stand there when that disinfectant's in the air, how the hell do you think a horse will? And of course, it leads to inflammation in the lung anyway, because the problems you're trying to prevent, you're actually causing. The same, I've even seen scenarios where people will have a fox cowering in the back, or sorry, a horse cowering in the back of the box, right? Because they actually have to fog around while the horse is still in there.
Crazy.
So
Crazy.
the rule is while the horse is out, fog the box, make sure it's not going over the wall into another horse. If you can walk back in there, and yes, you're still going to get a bit of a smell, but you shouldn't ever feel like it's getting the back of your throat or it's noxious.
Yeah, yeah.
Once you're happy,
Get a drink for yourself there.
it's okay, yeah. But once you're happy that so the ideal situation with foggers in an individual box is close up your windows, close up your doors, fog the box,
Mm.
then open up your windows and open up your doors
Mm.
and let any airborne disinfectant get out before you put the horse back in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's wise words. Just as we've been talking about the young stock there, there is a question here. It's in relation to growth issues in stock. Now, appreciatively, mostly when we talk about growth issues, the what comes to mind is, you know, joints inflamed or issues with stifles and so forth. This person's issue is not that. It is that they feel that the offspring of the cross of a 16.2 and 17 hand is quite small at 14.3, but seems to be otherwise in good health. And they're wondering, are there any tests that they can undertake to, you know, see if there is some other nutritive reason why the growth is affected, or is this simply a case of the genes?
Simply a case of the genes and possibly a first mold, right? Interestingly, it can often actually, or you often get a scenario where it would be the other way. So in our pathology department, we may get a scenario where you have a foal that's aborted, but that foal for the covering dates that we were given is much bigger than it should have been, or much more developed coats, for example. And invariably, when I go back and visit that farm, I find that they've been the scenario that we described earlier, where they're far too use far too much fertilizer, trying to drive grass, right? And we know that horses don't particularly do well with high energy grass and high nitrate grasses, right? So it is amazing the amount of times that you could have a farm of say 10 paddocks, and the paddock that this particular abortion may have happened, and you get this funny foal, is actually the one that has the highest nitrate levels, has the lowest pH, the highest antagonistic minerals, etc. And it's just down to far too much fertilizer
Mhm.
and putting the horses out too quickly on it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. And I suppose, you know, even just I saw on my phone there this evening, there was RT News hottest year this past year. Climate is changing, and will continue to change. From the perspective of the land management side of the house, are you seeing new trends, different causatives, different issues arising relating to the change in we'll say the drought periods and then the wet periods and the changes in temperatures?
definitely, I think we have to be a lot more aware of what's happening. So compaction is a massive issue now, and certainly more of an issue than it was, as bad as I can ever remember. So the rain, not only is there more of it, it's the intensity of it that's causing compaction. So your grass height is very important. I don't think, particularly in the wetter periods, that if you graze too tight, right, you're running the risk of huge compaction problems, right? So again, I have the perfect scenario for grazing horses for me is rest your land, fertilize it when you know what you need to do. When the rain is coming, obviously cattle in first, take the high energy grasses out, horses follow in, then you rest fertilize again if you need to, depending on your stock intensity, and then cattle, horses, and then sheep at the end to clean up the place. But within that, I can set out this perfect scenario, but you have to be nimble depending on conditions. There's
Absolutely.
no point, say, for example, sending in the sheep when there's no grass left, right, etc. And next minute you get streams of rain and you've just got extremely compacted land and everything just keeps washing off the top. So all of that plays into good management, but stocking, the old stock person, I just would say stock man, the stock person is still very, very important. And that's when we talk about not forgetting the old ways, a lot of that was kind of, I suppose, second nature to most people.
More
But
intuitive to people.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. There is I just noticed I missed a question earlier in relation to rodents and their potential effect on automatic drinkers. And the question also extends to the appropriateness of using Epsom salts in the after the cleaning of static water troughs. Any perspectives?
But just with rodents in particular, just be aware that if you have a barn that has a holding tank for water, so maybe you have low pressure, and you have a well feeding into an open tank, that's feeding your water troughs, just be aware that it's very probable and happens a lot that rodents are going in there for a drink, and particularly if they're after getting a bit of poison, they'll definitely jump in to try and get a drink. And then as they decay or what they bring with them, that disease is now, you know, exposed to your horses. So don't have open tanks. Is the first thing I would say. Get a piece of timber cut that's going to fit exactly on the top of it and cover your tank up to make sure the birds or rodents can't get into it. And then, we do have, I won't go into it now, but we do have different methods of flushing water systems, and that should be done periodically, particularly if they've got automatic drinkers. I'm a big believer in if you have the time and the patience and it's good exercise to feed from a bucket because, you know what they're drinking and you can clean it very easily. But, in a busy yard or somebody who has a full-time job and they don't have time to be carrying around buckets of water, obviously you use the drinkers, but remember they have to be maintained.
Absolutely.
With the Epsom salts, yeah, I've no problem with that being flushed through a system. I find Epsom salts are, they're a good thing.
Mhm. And there is another question here, which I think we're going to pretty much wrap up on, in relation to spreading manure on paddocks. It doesn't specify what type of manure, but I'm assuming that they are alluding to the reuse of equine manure. How long is the correct time to leave stock off that paddock before regrazing? And
How
this
long is
this is
piece of
like this.
right?
If you could just
Right.
give a couple of little pointers on
Well,
this
look, I'll give
in
I'll give you a
relation
bit
to
of, yeah. I'm
the
currently working with a very, very big firm in the UK that want to be a bit more organic. Let's put it like that, right? And they do happen to have a source of organic material from cattle, etc. And but they're very interested in composting,
mm,
right? And I think unless you have a way of
like,
aging
yeah,
manure for a long, long time, or you have a way of composting, and there's lots of videos out there from big stud farms that you can have a look at.
there is, and there's various machinery
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
usable as
spreading,
well, and
spreading slurry,
all of
spreading,
that. Yeah.
throwing bacteria on it that are going to cause it to decompose quickly. The reality is, you need it to go out on the land in in a rate that's not going to cause any problems to the growth of the grass that you're trying to feed, right? So in other words, not too heavy. It also has to be put on and be pretty sure that there's no infectious agent still alive in it. So that means there should be a lot of heat through it and there should be a lot of decomposition, etc., etc. So again, I suppose the first question is what's going into it. Obviously, straw is going to decompose an awful lot quicker than shavings will, or wood chip will, or anything like that. So it's that's why I say how long is a piece of string. If it was there is scenarios where people are thinking about if they're bedding with straw to actually add bacteria to it to start the decomposition before it's even taken out of the box. so that it'll decompose much quicker. And then, you have a way of turning it over, making sure that the heating is uniform through it. And then it's a very useful resource. But if it's not done properly, it's a very dangerous resource. So it's that needs a bit of guidance. I don't think you should just have a manure heap and throw it back out in your land, because you're asking for trouble with parasite issues and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've, rightly said before as well too, it's, where there are other issues that can arise from your Dunkstead area as well, in relation to, its situation relative to your stable block, and its situation relative to where you're storing your forage or your bedding as well too. And, you know, um, uh,
Simply put, every disease that's ever passed through your yard in a year, if you only empty your manure heap in a year,
finishes in your,
it finishes up in your manure heap, right? That's the same on every farm. It is a useful resource, but we have to make sure it's safe before we put it out, and that's not a simple process. You need a little bit of advice from somebody who knows what you're talking about. It is possible and it can be done, but it's not just a case of leaving it there for 6 months or a year. It depends on what's in it and the scenario it's
how
in.
it's managed as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So look, Alan, we have reached the 10 o'clock mark, and that is my cut off
Yeah.
tonight. So I just want to say a huge thanks to yourself for your time, your information, and your chat. I also want to extend a huge thanks to those who have stuck with us to the very end and have engaged so much with the input of questions and all of that. That's always greatly appreciated from both of us. It helps. Apologies, I didn't use all the slides, but I felt like we didn't really need them. We had enough to keep us going with the chat. So a huge thanks to everybody for being with us here this evening. And the next Let's Talk Equine is on Tuesday, if my mind is working correctly, the 6th of February. So hopefully people will come back and join me then. And I'll let you know in the interim who will be with me. And yeah, so wrapping up for tonight, and I can well hope that people will have taken some gems of information from the evening. We went a lot of different directions with conversation, and I know that yourself, your colleagues in the Irish Equine Centre, you are there for the service of all the industry, and people can reach out to you there as well too. And yeah, I hope that the New Year 2024 serves you well, Alan, and the Irish Equine Centre likewise. So thanks so much for giving your
No
time.
problem. And just to emphasize to everybody, we have an awful lot of expertise in the Equine Centre. We're available to everybody. Our phone numbers are on the website. Our emails are on the website. Don't be shy if you have any questions. We're only too glad to help. And thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. And I think there's, like even services there, and just even to mention, being that we're coming into the time of the year where, foals are coming on the ground, if people have issues with abortions or things like that, there are services there that are freely available to people in those scenarios as well. So do reach out and, get in touch with the Irish Equine Centre. They are, like, I really feel that the staff and the dedication to the sector and to the health of the sector. I mean, health in the whole horse population, it is everything. It is the crux on which we will live or die as a sector. And when disease comes in, and it has in the past, and staff there have played a huge role in effectively sitting on it. And you're a resource not just here, but to others as a resource outside the country as well too. And there's a lot of liaison with government and with others across the world, I'm sure, in keeping on top of disease and the connotation. But the environmental section and the nutrition section in the centre, the services that are provided by yourselves, they continue to extend. You have new diagnostics and equipment and all the rest there. And like I say, thanks so much for what you do for the sector and for your time here this evening. So I'll press the red button here and say good night to everybody, and thanks for those who stayed with us.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.